Hello, and this is Delia again, and I'm going to continue where I was at. We're still on chapter 6, and I believe this is part 4, I think. I'm not really sure. Outside, she threw herself into the whirl of color and music. She was brighter than she had ever been at any dance before. She danced with everyone, laughing too loudly, flirting with every boy in her path. They were calling her to come up and be crowned. She stood on the stage looking down on the butterfly bright figures below. Someone gave her flowers. Someone put a rhinestone tiara on her head. There was clapping. It all passed as if in a dream. She flirted with Tyler because he was closest when she came off the stage. Then she remembered what he and Dick had done to Stephen, and she broke off one of the roses from the bouquet and gave it to him. Matt was looking on from the sidelines, his mouth tight. Tyler's forgotten date was almost in tears. She could smell alcohol along with the mint on Tyler's breath now, and his face was red. His friends were around her, a shouting, laughing crowd, and she saw Dick pour something from a brown paper bag into his glass of punch. She'd never been with this group before. They welcomed her, admired her, and the boys, admiring her, the boys, for her attention. Jokes flew back and forth, and Elena laughed, even when they didn't make sense. Tyler's arm circled her waist, and she just laughed harder. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Matt shake his head and walk away. The girls were getting shrill, the boys rowdy. Tyler was nuzzling moistly at her neck. "I've got an idea," he announced to the group, hugging Elena more tightly to him. "Let's go someplace more fun." Somebody shouted, "Like where, Tyler? Your dad's house?" Tyler was grinning, a big, boozy, reckless grin. "No, I mean someplace where we can leave our mark." "Like the cemetery?" The girls squealed. The boys elbowed each other and with fake punches. Tyler's date was still standing outside the circle. "Tyler, that's crazy," she said, her voice high and thin. "You know what happened to that old man. I won't go there." "Great, then you stay here." Tyler fished keys out of his pocket and waved them at the rest of the crowd. "Who isn't afraid?" he said. "Hey, I'm up for it," said Dick, and there was a chorus of approval. "Me too," said Elena, clear and defiant. She smiled up at Tyler, and he practically swung her off her feet. And then she and Tyler were leading a noisy, roughhousing group into the parking lot, where they were all piling into cars. And then Tyler was putting the top of his convertible down, and she was climbing in, with Dick and a girl named Vicky Bennett squashing into the back seat. "Elena," somebody shouted far away from the lighted doorway at the school. "Drive," she said to Tyler, taking off her tiara, and the engine growled to life. They burned rubber out of the parking lot, and the cool night wind blew into Elena's face. So now we're on to chapter 7. I'll read a little bit of it until my phone starts getting hot. Chapter 7. Bonnie was on the dance floor, eyes shut, letting the music flow through her. When she opened her eyes for an instant, Meredith was beckoning from the sidelines. Bonnie thrust her chin out, but as the gestures became more insistent, she rolled her eyes up at Raymond and obeyed. Raymond followed. Matt and Ed were behind Meredith. Matt was scowling. Ed was looking uncomfortable. "Elena just left," said Meredith. "It's a free country," said Bonnie. "Well, she went with Tyler Smallwood," said Meredith. "Matt, are you sure you didn't hear where they were going?" Matt shook his head. "I'd say she deserves whatever happens. But it's my fault in a way, too." It's my fault, too, in a way," he said bleakly. "I guess we ought to go after her. Leave the dance, Bonnie said. She looked at Meredith, who mouthed the words, "You promised." "I don't believe this," she muttered savagely. "I don't know how we'll find her," said Meredith, "but we've got to try." Then she added in a strangely hesitant voice, "Bonnie, you don't happen to know where she is, do you?" "What? No, of course not. I've been dancing. You've heard of that, haven't you? What you go to a dance for?" "You and Ray stay here," Matt said to Ed. "If she comes back, tell her we're out looking." "And if we're going, we better go now," Bonnie put in ungraciously. She turned and promptly ran into a dark blazer. "Well, excuse me," he snapped, looking up and seeing Stefan Salvatore. He said nothing as she and Meredith and Matt headed for the door, leaving an unhappy-looking Raymond and Ed behind. The stars were distant and ice bright in the cloudless sky. Elena just like them. Elena felt just like them. Part of her was laughing and shouting with Dick and Vicky and Tyler over the roar of the wind, but part of her was watching from far away. Tyler parked halfway up the hill to the ruined church, leaving his headlights on as they all got out. Although there had been several cars behind them when they left the school, they appeared to be the only ones who made it all the way to the cemetery. Tyler opened the trunk and pulled out a six-pack. "All the more for us," he offered a beer to Elena, who shook her head, trying to ignore the sick feeling in the pit of her stomach. She felt all wrong being here, but there was no way she was going to admit that now. They climbed the flagstone path, and the girls staggering in their high heels and leaning on the boys. When they reached the top, Elena gasped, and Vicky gave a little scream. Something huge and red was hovering just above the horizon. It took Elena a moment to realize it was actually the moon. It was as large and unrealistic as a prop in a science fiction movie, and its bloated mass glowed dully with an unwholesome light. "Like a big rotten pumpkin," said Tyler, and lobbed a stone at it. Elena made herself smile brilliantly up at him. "Why don't we go inside?" Vicky said, pointing a white hand at the empty hole of the church doorway. Most of the roof had fallen in, although the belfry was still intact, a tower stretching high above them. 3 of the walls were standing, and the 4th was only knee-high. There were piles of rubble everywhere. Okay, so I'll have to stop my phone again. Okay, and I will continue.